And suddenly she was gone. Anna Wintour says goodbye to Vogue. And if you don't know what Vogue is, and believe me, I am not, as you see, this is not a fashion podcast, obviously, and not a fashion video cast if you're looking on YouTube or watching on YouTube right now. Anna Wintour at Vogue magazine says goodbye after 37 years in charge as the editor-in-chief. She made it from just a fashion magazine to the world leading fashion magazine, and now she's leaving. The question is, when you now say one of your most significant figures, one of your most important employees, one person you really need in your business, your organization, when that person says, I think I'm moving on, what happens to your business, to your organization, to anything you do? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Succession planning is crucial. However, most companies, most organizations practice what we call hope. They simply say, hopefully no one gets sick, hopefully no one leaves, hopefully this is all going to be somehow okay. And if not, hopefully we will figure out on the way how we solve it. And that, of course, is not a sustainable principle. Our topic of today is succession planning. When we talk about succession planning, there's a lot of pseudoscience out there where people say, oh, people really like the change, or people say, you will always figure out how it goes, especially when you have regulation on your market and suddenly there is no one. I can tell you the regulator will not be happy with you. And especially when you have to file different things, then especially when material is suddenly missing due to a lack of expertise, you can usually choose between either having a violation and being fined, or you simply have to hire someone external for an enormous amount of money, because people, of course, will realize that you suddenly lack the expertise and they most likely will charge accordingly. So what happens when succession planning comes into place? And there are different scenarios you have to think about. Scenario number one, and that's of course the scenario anyone hopes that they will face the most because it is so predictable, that is retirement. And retirement, of course, goes and comes in different forms. I am self-employed, which means I will not retire the usual way. I don't plan to ever retire. I like what I do. I love what I do. So I will keep going in one way or the other. However, in many positions, you have to retire sooner or later. When you are at Supreme Court, for example, in Germany, you can't sit there for longer than 8 years. So you have to leave, no matter how important you are, no matter how brilliant you are, no matter what kind of job you did and how important you were for the country. After 8 years, that was it. The same, for example, applies to the President of the United States of America. In free enterprise, you usually can go longer if you want to. However, there are certain systems in place, for example, in Switzerland, where there is a maximum retirement age that when you work longer than that, there is no benefit from you. There's no benefit for you, but still the state-driven deductions. Of course, many people say, why do I pay this? I think I can retire. Or they go for self-employment. And of course, when you are at public service, there's usually a hard line where they say, look, that is the age where you retire, maybe a bit of extension depending on which country you're in. But usually they say from that point in time, you're done and you have to leave and enjoy your retirement. So when you are retired, that is, of course, something you can plan. Then, of course, there is voluntary and natural fluctuation. So, for example, when there's someone telling you, hey, next year I'm going to leave Europe, I'm going to move to Canada, this happens in 18 months' time, and they tell you everything up front so you can plan properly. That is a typical case of voluntary and natural fluctuation. However, there's also the case, and we all know that, when there is involuntary or non-natural fluctuation, which means you say, the famous phrase, I have to let you go, which they often say in the US, which means I have to fire you. You're fired. You're gone. Leave. We don't want you here. So non-natural fluctuation can also mean that someone says, thank you very much for the great offer. Thank you very much for considering me to stay here for the next couple of decades, because I'm now here for 2 decades already and you think I'm staying a third one, and hear the news. I won't. Because sometimes people simply move on. There's a wide range of reasons why people do that. However, all these non-natural fluctuation aspects have one thing in common. You have to deal with them if you like it or not. You cannot force people to stay. You can, of course, offer them more money or more benefits or whatever else, but when they simply say, no, I move on, they will move on. And in addition to that, even when you try to force them and you say, oh, when you quit, you have to stick to that kind of time frame, when they simply walk out, they walk out. And especially in the English-speaking world, you know that a walkout exists. Pretty shocking for the German-speaking world. When I tell Germans that sometimes people just walk out, they think, but they have to file that they quit, letter of resignation. No, sometimes people just walk out. In hospitality, especially, sometimes people either don't turn up anymore or they simply walk out. And that is extremely important, that you have everything lined up for that case. And by the way, when people walk out, usually leadership is not great, because leadership often plays a crucial role here. The question is, which aspects are there? And of course, first, and that's where most people start with, they say, hey, jobs and tasks have to be defined, so we have job descriptions. I know that many companies and organizations have job descriptions. Usually it goes the following: when I have a consultancy gig there, or a training session, or a coaching, and could I please see the job description? They're like, yeah, here it is. And then they hand it to me and they say, yeah, just take a look. And they are a bit hesitant, and I wonder why. And sometimes they are a bit more straightforward, sometimes they are not. And when I say, why are you so hesitant? They're like, yeah, we wrote these in 1997, and maybe not everything is up to date. I'm not sure, but I think the job didn't change that much, so I think it should be okay. Just give me some feedback, please. And I look at it and I say something like, well, it's there's something about putting in IP addresses on Windows for work groups and saving certain files in Excel 95 format. Not too much up to date, is it? And they say, yeah, I think that's maybe needs some update. Yeah, we don't have the whole system in place anymore. We changed the whole CRM system now. Oops. And there you are. So having job descriptions also means you need to have people who take care of them. And of course, job descriptions alone is not succession planning. There's a huge aspect of culture. I am pretty sure that when Anna Wintour now leaves Vogue, she was involved in succession planning. Who can take over, and also who wants to take over that situation? Let's face it, someone says, do you want to be the chief editor of Vogue? And by the way, no pressure here. The only thing you inherit is that someone made a random fashion magazine to the world-leading publication globally. No pressure. Do you want to take that over? Do you think that you can just sit there and say, I think I just fit in? And of course, in addition to that, when you see, for example, Hollywood blockbuster films such as, or movies such as The Devil Wears Prada, clearly a satire and comedy piece about Anna Wintour's leadership style. If this is true or not is debatable, and let's not talk about that right now. But when you have this aspect, be sure that cultural change happens when people change. You can, of course, try to keep the same culture, but often change is needed when people change. I was extremely positively surprised when someone from Siemens, a very traditional, pretty conservative German company, at the largest German talent meeting suddenly said, we implemented holacracy in a decisive department, but only after the leader retired. We decided about just for the people who don't know holacracy, holacracy means you're getting rid of basically almost any or almost any, all of, or the most structures regarding hierarchy. You're working with teams based on expertise. Not easy to implement, but it's possible in certain settings. And this kind of culture means that you have to undergo a dramatic change, because Siemens is very hierarchically structured, and they openly said we didn't implement it before that because the leader we had of that department wasn't open for it. It was someone who was 63 and a half years old, 18 months to retirement, and we said we wait till that person retires. The person clearly said us they don't want it, so we're not going to implement it until that person retires. Person retired, cultural change happened. And also, cultural change has to happen when you see, for example, that the Chamber of Commerce and the Chamber of Tradesmanship, the Chamber of Trades, Chamber of Craftsmanship in Germany, in North Rhine-Westphalia, published that out of 1,100 vocational training jobs where people signed contracts, even in German culture, suddenly 84 didn't turn up on day one. That's 7%. 7% of the people, that's almost every 10th person saying, yeah, I signed the contract, still couldn't give a flipping flamingo. I just don't turn up. I found something better, or I'm not going to go to work at all. So you see, cultural change has to happen, especially regarding leadership. There are way more challenges today than there were a couple of decades ago. When you simply say, we keep going as we did before, or you try to copy someone and you try to imitate someone who you are clearly not, you lose authenticity and people will not follow you due to a lack of social legitimation. And that is the third and most important aspect is people, especially today, when you do not handle the people process. So, for example, one aspect that I see significantly often is that people say, yeah, we have a change. There's a new sales leader. So this is your new sales executive. He's leading the team. And they start with, Yeah, more the authoritarian style. So here are the orders. And then someone says, I don't think that this is the culture we have. How do you plan to blend into the culture? And they say, I'm not blending. I'm not blending. This is my culture and it's presented to you. Take it or leave it. And suddenly you wonder why you have 20 or 30% fluctuation in your organization. If you want that, then you achieved your goal. If you didn't want that, you have to open your wallet wide, wide, wide to cover the recruiting costs you have now. The people aspect of succession planning is a significant one. And sometimes cultural change and people change is much needed. One of these examples is, for example, Trigema, a German fashion company that produces every single piece of clothing in Germany, which of course comes with a tremendous challenge of cost of work, cost of social contribution, but they keep going with it and they are successful with it. And when the owner, who is now more than 80 years old, was asked about remote work, working from home, he said word by word, no one here is working from home because when you're working from home, you can't be important for the organization. That, of course, when you now smashed your table on the table and you're just back with me, I feel you, and I felt exactly the same when I heard this. Of course, a completely outdated view. Remote work, of course, especially RCR, in a competition regarding talent. Remote work needs to be a part of the offer. And immediately, his children jumped in, who will overtake the company, overtook it recently. They said, look, that is the point of view our father has, but that is not the culture we have right now. Of course, we have an offer for remote work in our organization, and that saved the day and also reputation of the organization. Very important is the cultural aspect and the people aspect are extremely important, and it needs to be properly planned, because often people wonder, so how can I get everything implemented? Because when I want to have all this succession thing, how do I get this implemented in reality? Because it starts with documentation. But the problem is, as I already pointed out, documentation is often done once and that's it. And when you do documentation once and say, yeah, I think that's it, people will say, yeah, look at all this outdated material. When someone says, could you update it? No, it's not my job. Not my job. Someone has to do it. Yeah, someone has to do with job. So just give it to HR. And HR says, besides the 138 tasks we have, plus recruiting on top. And now this on top? I don't think so. And then it will simply get put into some cupboard, and then it will stay there until it becomes relevant, and suddenly you wonder, why is it not up to date? When you have any kind of documentation, you need to name people word by word, have to tell them, needs to be written down, needs to be agreed, especially not just ordered, but agreed. Who is going to update these documents? Who is responsible and accountable for these documents, for the outcome? And usually there are different people accountable. Accountability is usually with a department leader, and responsibility with a department member, someone who works there. Both has to be covered in writing, that we clearly know who's responsible and who's accountable for all of this. And of course, last but not least, you need to have the right processes in place. When you simply say, as soon as someone leaves, we're going to figure it out on the way, that is not how it goes. That is not how anything works in this organization or in any organization. When you say we want to have an organization that's thriving in any kind of climate, in any kind of situation, any kind of challenge and problem situation, then you need to change the process as well. Or you need to implement one if you don't have any so far. When you go through all of this and you play through all the scenarios very well. And by the way, with scenarios, you always have data. So for example, when you know, hey, our average turnover is 4%, you can plan for the 4%. On every single count, you can plan with it. When you say, hey, we hire 10 people for voluntary training, for vocational training, but usually 10 people, only 7 make it, you can plan accordingly. But you also have to plan for what happens if all 10 make it. Do we have enough jobs available? When you go through all these scenarios, through all the aspects, and by the way, just yesterday, we published an interview with Francie Jane, who's an expert on leadership, especially in the medical industry and in the STEM industry, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics, math, as they say in the UK. And we talked about that some hospitals now in the US have 20% turnover in their staff, amongst their staff. 20% means 1/5 of the whole organization changed within a year. And you wonder why you can't get hold of your recruiting costs and you can't cover the cost that you have. Well, maybe change something about what you do. So when you go through all the scenarios very well, when you cover the aspects very well, and when then the implementation works very well, then your succession planning will be a successful one. And that's exactly what I wish you. All the best of success with your succession. When there's anything coming up, be prepared. And when you now say, I think I need to talk about you. And I need to talk with you about something. Yeah, feel free to do so. When you're watching me on YouTube, feel free to put a like here, subscribe to the channel, and please click the small bell so you don't miss future updates. Of course, you can comment here. I'm looking forward to your comments. You can also put a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you're listening to me on these two platforms. Thank you very much for 5 stars. Of course, recommend the video channel or the podcast to your friends, family, colleagues, share it on social media and everything. Thank you very much for doing so. One aspect we have only on YouTube is the YouTube Shorts. We have leadership tips. More than 70 are already online, and it's growing every day. I put usually about one per day out there. Feel free to join here. That's only available on YouTube because there's no other channel offering the combination of, I usually take press articles and then talk about what happened in the world of leadership and what can we learn from it from a scientific and proven point of view. So not just an opinion, another best practice approach. Of course, you can also follow me on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and go to my website, nb-networks.biz. Then you can see what I do and what I offer. If you now say discussion, yes, but public, no, feel free to drop me an email. Send me an email, nb@nb-networks.com. When you send me an email there, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. This episode also happened based on emails I received and questions that people simply had. When you now say, I like to have live sessions, we offer live sessions as well. When you go to expert.nb-networks.com, just put your email address in there. You only receive one email every week, every Wednesday morning, and that's 100% content at free guarantee. And what you find in there is full access to all the articles, more than 400 in German and English, full access to all the podcasts, no paywall, no nothing, to all the podcasts, more than 400 also in English and German. And also you find the link to the next live session, including date and time. Very important here, we only publish that the only way to access live sessions is via the leadership letter. So feel free to sign up, and no worries, 100% content, ad-free guarantee. And of course, feel free to follow me, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I'm available on all of these channels. I'm looking forward to hearing from you there. At the end of this podcast, it is always to say the most important part is coming now, and that means apply what you heard, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the positive changes that you obviously want to see in your organization. I wish you all the best doing so. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Any kind of message will be answered within 24 hours or less, so I'm looking forward to hearing from you there. And at the end of this podcast and at the end of this video cast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.